All right, this is part two of kind of going over my paper that I wrote for human rights. I left off with the idea of like adjusting for genocide and being niche with our military intervention because I remember being asked in class, like when I was kind of like talking about this topic and like my ideas of what I'm going to go through and talk about. My professor specifically asked me, he goes, "What about genocide?" And I goes, "Well, I don't know. I suggest maybe that the countries that are actually imminently in danger, such as, let's talk about Poland gets invaded, and let's talk about the UK now. They're starting to see an imminent threat, especially to their territory and to their location. Then they can interfere. But the Americas should have never interfered. But then again, the Americas interfered because of Pearl Harbor. I digress. So once Pearl Harbor happens, then I think it's appropriate for them to retaliate in the way that they did. Probably not. Are we really? Do we really need to be nuking people? Probably not. But that's what happened. um, I don't know. I don't know if I actually agree with that. It's not just, I don't know. Sometimes you like talk things through and you're like, well, maybe I don't know, and you got to get through it. But I digress. A lot of my argumentation then kind of falls into, well, as a species, as a people, we think we are in, I'm agnostic. So this is the struggle. But a lot of people tie like very much to these ideas of morality. They tie to the word justice, injustice, virtues, feelings. Like those are very much a very real thing that we can't even physically access because we have deemed them to be so important. We have deemed morality to be a very, you know, uh, up there thing to achieve. I suggest that, which I think this is very true, if we are not barred by societal standards, and if we have no government and ruling bodies, we would be in full anarchy, and humans would just indulge in their animalistic behaviors. Anarchy would set in. Maybe it would take a bit of time because I remember a peer of mine suggesting as much, being like, "Well, I don't like. Do you really think people?" And I say, it would probably take a few years, but everything would slowly break down. If people aren't getting punished for doing criminal acts, then yeah, I think people would go insane and do crazy shit. And the factor of it would be like a domino effect. The more people doing crazy shit, the more people would have to defend themselves from said crazy shit, and then people would start to, the trust would be lost in society. No one's being held to standards, and then you get situations like, have you ever seen The Walking Dead? Society breaks down. Like it can kind of work sometimes, and you try to get it to work, but it always ends up being the case that in a world full of anarchy, people are fucking crazy, and they're not actually good people. So this kind of leads into my other part is that I don't think there's inherent good. I don't think there's morals. I don't think there's justice. I don't think there's any of these things. I don't think there's a God. I don't think that. I don't think anything of it. I think we're just a species. We are just humans and we do things. We do and we don't do things. That's it. And so if we weren't like the crazy thing is the unique thing that I'm trying to tie it to is the idea of consciousness. And consciousness is almost like um it's it consciousness creates the noble lie, and that's how we operate. If we don't have the noble lie, we don't operate and we don't push forward as a people. The noble lie that consciousness suggests is it gives us these fantastical ideas of morality and justice, and like that we are of a higher being, and that we have more to give and more to do, and that we are separate from the beasts that also lay claim to this land, that we're so much different. And you know that's what consciousness does. And I say it's a plague, but honestly, if not for consciousness, we would just be, Stone Age forever, I think. Or, previous to Stone Age. We would just be humans that have just perpetually not evolved. Consciousness, and be it it's done some negative things, consciousness keeps us from anarchy, I think. I think. So, with that, um, go down a little bit. Here's a paragraph. Like consciousness, I think is necessary. I think it's actually a burden because it gives us these like false ideas. But since we have these false ideas, it's kind of protecting us in a sense. It's protecting us from ourselves, nothing else. And it's helping us kind of move forward in a world that doesn't really mean anything to move forward in. Like, does it really mean anything if we actually like travel the stars? I don't necessarily think so. I think that we just have gotten super lucky and we experience conscious thought, but the conscious thought is just a fever dream and thinking that we are more than what we are. Um, I do want to touch back on the point of like justice and injustice. There's a whole paragraph in a working that I quote Plato and the Republic and the Just City, of course, because I am not over that book and I probably will never be. But here's some quotes from my paper, just from me. Ultimately, in my eyes, we have no good, yet no evil, and of course, uh, justice or injustice. I'm referring to a larger scale, but nonetheless, we only have realistic action or non-action. Morality, virtues, justifications, and emotions are attached to human existence almost just as much as our own limbs. They aren't physical, but somehow so real to us because we have believed them to be necessary. To dive further on my disdain with justice and what I believe to be a fallacy of the ideas, I will look at the Republic by Plato, in which he states, "Will tell them that gold and silver of a divine sort from the gods they have in their soul always, and have no further need of the human sort, nor is it holy to pollute the possession of the former sort by mixing it with the possession of moral sort, because many unholy things have been done for the sake of currency of the many, while theirs untainted." We're at 6 minutes. I do want to do just probably a two-parter. So what I'm suggesting here is that all right, let's go. The just city, it really is only created through unjust actions. Like Socrates puts it, that in order to have an appropriate auxiliary or armed force or militia, we need to strip them of liberties. Also, these souls are deemed prior, meaning they have no say. They're basically enslaved, hypothetically, if they are of a silver nature, right? They're enslaved to it. So I don't think that's right. I think you should be able to be born and articulate what you want to do and be able to have the freedoms that you want, not based on you know who someone else thinks you are and then dictate what you're allowed to have or not when you haven't even experienced this world. You get into some social contract theory ideas, but ultimately, um, that's the issue. Uh, yeah, I mean, the ending though, which I think is one of my best paragraphs ever written. Real quick, I'll touch on this idea is, Western ideas, and the United Nations is basically a Christian Western founded ideology. They don't take into account, the Muslim way. They don't take into account the Eastern, Asian thoughts and views on the world. They just don't. I hate to say it to you, but they don't, and we don't think about it like that. And we don't think of human rights as those countries. We don't think of communist China as having a lot of human rights. Some people would argue, but some people would argue the opposite. Whatever. Um, all this being said, all my disdain, all these issues is like there's not really another answer, I think, as of right now. So I'm going to read you this last paragraph. I think it's very well written. I'm proud of it. Peering out of the flooded cave just to find a world burning to the ground, which route do you take? Realistically, even if I can't find myself agreeing with these notions and thoughts of human rights and subjecting cultures to mass reformation, I think humans cannot function and progress in terms of technology and science without some basis of protection, and that's what the fallacy of these rights gives, at least to some degree. While I think we are creatures enslaved and plagued by an eccentric experience, I can't deny that experience exists. So long as we are enslaved by feelings, morals, and acts of justice, I don't see another way to operate without breaking into full anarchy. I understand the rationale for these ideas, so I will forfeit my efforts in the name of Plato. I will shrink away and enjoy the shadows on the wall for as long as I can. I think we're burdened to be prisoners of the allegory of the cave. I don't think there's another way around it, or at least the West isn't the appropriate society to do so, and we're another stepping stone that needs to be used to get to a proper utopian society, I guess. And what does utopian even mean when you have to burden other societies with, immense suffering? I'm not sure. What do you think? Do we have inherent human rights? Yes or no?